Hey, friends and family from Ronny's Farm to Table. It's a wonderful sunny Sunday morning in the Red River Valley. I just came back from church and boy, it's the 100th episode. I'm so excited about it. It was quite a road here, 5 months. And when you guys remember the first episodes, we walked in there was just pianos everywhere. There was nothing mushroom related. And within 5 months, we were able to establish a little operation in there. And it's growing, it's becoming better each day, and I'm so excited. Day 3 of recording this episode here, because every single day I find something, it's not quite right. So today is the day that I will record finally something that's well thought out and it's gonna work. I had several days with my dad that I was interviewing him, but today we're gonna do a little bit different. Oh, look, there's my wife. Bye, wife. She's actually heading back to church. There's a singing group meeting, so back. So today will be the day that me and my dad gonna have this little interview about probably a little bit about the Rightmare history, about each other, and just celebrating the success that I had 100 episodes on YouTube. So, alrighty, let's get. Hey, friends and family, we are here in the movie studio of my dad, and look at that, we even have mushrooms in the background. How cool is that? High technology here, huh? And we are here with my dad, John Rightmare, the one and only, the greatest dad in the world ever. Smartest guy in the room. I cannot say good enough things about you. You are just a wonderful father and a wonderful human being. I'm so fortunate to have you in my life.
I didn't bring my wallet. Some money.
No. So we were going to talk today on Father's Friday, the very first episode, about our father's generation. A little bit about the history, how the Rightmares came to be here, and down the line a little bit. So I will give it over to my dad, and he can take it off with talking about how the Rightmares came to America.
Well, first of all, before 1880 is when the Great Trip happened. And they came from Westphalia and the Danzig, Poland. It's now, the lines over in Germany kept moving. But so what's now Danzig, Poland was actually part of Germany. And that's where one great-grandparent came from, and one came from Westphalia, which is kind of the northwest section of Germany, very industrialized section. And they came, and first they settled in Wisconsin. I don't know where in Wisconsin, but there's still relatives of relatives that are there, mostly on the married women's side. So the name Fox is one of the surnames that is our relatives in Wisconsin. But something happened in 1880, and they packed everybody up and packed him. And of course, remember, they didn't come by jet, they didn't come by car or truck. They came in a buckboard, and they made it from Wisconsin all across Minnesota. It's 300 miles to Minneapolis, so it was 380 miles. Not exactly well-paved roads, and settled here. And they came here because this is where the Land Grant Association was passing out farmland. As America was expanding, one of the incentives was to come to America and get free land, because everybody was either a farmer or a businessman that pretty much supported the farmers of one kind or another. Supported the farmers, the grocery kind of store supported the farmers, obviously the creamery, the grain elevator, even clothing, wool came from sheep, came from cotton down in the south part of the country. So they came here in 1880, and they first settled 1 mile down the road in what we call the old home place, and were there 1880s, 1890s, 2000s. By that time, my great-grandfather had some children. One of those children was named Ed Rightmire. Also ultimately had a son, but they had different middle names. So although for business and everybody knowing who they were called Ed Sr. and Ed Jr., but they really weren't Ed Sr. and Ed Jr. But they came and were living down in the home place, which is a mile down, a pretty big house. And then from there, when my grandfather had 3 kids, great-grandpa decided they needed to have another place. So they bought this quarter section of land for $60 an acre, and that's where they went to town, frugal great-grandpa, like all these Germans that are around me, and bought a house that had a fire up in the roof and moved that out here. It's 22 by 22 feet. And that's what my grandfather and grandmother and 3 little kids. And then the 4th child was born in this house. And ultimately, there were 8 children that were born. But they moved back then. When great-grandpa died, he died young. Grandpa then moved down to the big house again. And this house had various owners and translations until my dad came and lived in it with Mother. They were married in 41. Then Dad was in the war, 42 to 44. They lived over at we call the Koolstra place, but it's the Hendricksons, I believe, that live there now. And then bought this place back and moved in here in 1947.
Can you elaborate a little bit about each building and which timeline they
Sure.
here?
Well, the house we've talked about a little bit. We can talk more about that. But the next building that came to the farm was what we call the Granary. And that was an ice house in Crookston. It had been living next to the Reitmeyer home in town. It was built as an ice house because my grandfather was in the dray business. And part of that business, kind of the make enough egg money every month, was delivering ice. So they had this giant building, and they cut ice down at the river and put it in there with sawdust, packed it with sawdust. And from that, they would deliver like 20-pound chunks of ice to ice boxes all over Crookston so that the women didn't have to waste food or throw it out because it would spoil. They were really good at putting it out on porches that weren't quite outside, not quite inside in the winter. But in the summer, it kept the milk cold, kept the cream cold, kept the butter stiff, and you couldn't do ice cream. But it did all the other things and preserved food so that the cost of eating was less. Mm-hmm. And so that was Grandpa's business. And also then when he moved out here, he became a farmer. And in the first years that he was here, that's when the Dust Bowl hit in the 20s down in Central America, but Central United States of America. And my dad remembers how Grandpa used to pace the floor back and forth because he was so afraid that he would lose the property, which they actually did lose it and buy it back. It went through several tumultuous times with bankers and things.
And then the Blue Garage and my mushroom barn, they must have been pretty close.
Yes, but no, the Blue Garage actually had been here. That would be the historically first building that came after the house.
Okay.
But it was built as a barn.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it moved on or was built in place, but it has had the floor redone in it. You can see that there was a foundation of cement around it, and then there was a cement floor poured in, and it's separated just a little bit. Mm-hmm. And you can see that. And a good son would now tear out all of that concrete and re-pour the floor in there. Just kidding. But so we call it the garage, and there were big truck doors placed in it. And the south side, all of my young life, was Dad's repair shop. Mm-hmm. And the north side was where the bigger of the two trucks spent the winter, unless he needed to, use it for some more things. But generally, the north side had the truck, and it just fit. I mean, to the inch. Mm-hmm. It literally fit in there. And then the south side was, and the work table is still there. And there's tools on this farm, as in all the farms around us. There are tools on the wall that my dad or even my grandfather was the last person to place and hang that tool on the wall. I almost don't want to touch them now because it's like they're just little monuments to the hard work and the ability to make good things out of a very limited supply of raw materials and things, tools, very limited tools even in the original days.
Then how about my mushroom barn?
That barn came from a farm up northwest of here, probably around 1957. So not counting the migrant labor houses, of which there's still one remaining on the farm, that would be the newest built building. This mobile home we're in is rolled on later, of course. And I remember the day that came. My cousin, the oldest cousin of all of the ones in my generation, was named Ronald or Ron. And he was a 6-foot-tall basketball star, football player guy. And moving that building down here, and remember, it's the main floor and then a haymow up. So it's a relatively tall building. And he had a T-bar made out of wood. And they would pull up to electric cables, and he would lift them up with that T-bar, and then they would slowly drive.
Boy.
The 40-foot, the barn is 40 by 20, 800 square feet. slowly drive by, and then he would let them down on the other side. And I remember seeing that happen because at the time, the wires, the electric goes across the north side of the road, so it crossed the road and came into our center pole. You remember that was put underground just a few years ago.
Right.
Otherwise, it was overhead cables.
Yeah.
And but I remember Ron holding that up as they were both coming down the road and turning in our yard. And here he is. There's no safety ropes. There's no steps nailed onto the roof. It's just him up on the peak with this bar holding up these wires as it went along. But that came, and it was then the cow barn and the pig barn. The upstairs would be full of hay and straw, and the east side had the sliding doors, and on the north side of that piece was the gutter, and then the row of cows, about 8 cows in stanchions. And they lived there, those cows lived their winter from the time that it got cold out in one place. They could stand up and they could lay down. But their neck was in this stanchion that held it this wide and 5 feet tall. And once in a while, when it was 30 degrees like it was yesterday, Dad would let them out. Now, these are big dairy cows. You know, you've seen always Holsteins, black and white, with the big udders down between their back legs. And when those cows got out the door, they would frolic around like little kids playing in the snow. They would jump and they would beller and they would hit each other, and they would they had the day, but about an hour, and they started getting cold in their more private parts, you know. And then they would come in, and every cow knew which stanchion was theirs. They never missed. They just always knew. Across from that were the calf pens and an area to hold the current hay that was being used. And when I was a little kid, my sister was 4 years younger, and sometimes we would go with Dad, or when Mom had to milk, we'd go out to the barn, and Jane would get sat on those bales, and Mom would milk the cows. First by hand, and then we got a milking machine. My dad could, milking like this way. You know how that's done. You've seen it in cartoons. But if there was a cat walking, he could like tilt it and shoot that cat. And the cats loved it because it was warm cow's milk, and it would get all over their face. And they just loved that. They would hang around just for that. But every once in a while, Dad would come in and say, well, Mitzi died, or every cat had a name. Midnight. A black cat was always called Midnight. Well, Midnight's dead. And it was always because it was so cold that they would snuggle up to a cow, and then the cow would turn. It would roll just enough and kill. That just kept happening. That's why you always kept many, many cats on the farm, because you just didn't know when one was going to leave.
The next building that was coming to the farmstead would have been the Quonset by then.
That's right. About a couple of years, actually. There was a big upswing in farming and technology and equipment right at that time. And that's when the Quonset, which is a steel building, a half moon, has no supports inside. The steel is like corrugated, and that's what gives it its strength. And it has been there now 40, 80 years, wow. Give or take. No, not 80, 70. I'm 10 years older. And other than it, the red paint is rusted a bit, which it's designed to do. That building has sat there, and of course a beautiful cement floor in it, and has housed all sorts of things. You know, now it has my motorhome. It was also set up that in the years when we had a bumper crop, you could put grain in it. There was 80 feet of grain, but it was peaked up, so it could only go 4 feet high against the wall. So that, and then the rest of it was like a peak in the middle. But that many, many years was full of grain. Because, again, as we talked about pricing, it was always better to sell it not at the peak of harvest.
So that gives you guys a little bit of an overview how the Reitmeyers came to this land here and how the buildings around this farmstead developed. And probably one of these days I will be able to go around other farmsteads, show you where the original farmstead was, where the biggest cow operation was, and where currently is our biggest operation that we have in the family. So thank you so much for your time, Dad. It was great hearing those stories, and I look forward to the next episode. Bye, folks.